Lucy had always been the golden girl of Cedar Valley. Everyone in the small town knew her name, and for all the right reasons. She was the daughter of William Chen, who ran the only bank in town for over 20 years. People trusted him with their life savings, their dreams of buying new farms, and their hopes for their children's future. Lucy herself was the town's beloved schoolteacher. Every morning she would walk down Main Street with her books in hand, and people would tip their hats and smile. The children adored her because she made learning fun. She would tell stories that made history come alive and turn math problems into exciting adventures. Parents respected her because their kids actually wanted to go to school. But Lucy was more than just a teacher. She helped organize the annual Harvest Festival, visited sick neighbors with homemade soup, and never missed a church service. When the Johnson family lost their crops to drought 2 summers ago, Lucy was the first person to start collecting donations. She even gave up her new dress money to help them. The whole town saw her as someone special. Young women looked up to her, hoping to be as graceful and kind. Older folks would say she reminded them of her late mother, who had been just as generous with her time and heart. Even the toughest ranchers would soften when Lucy spoke to them about their children's progress in school. Cedar Valley was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. But it was also the kind of place where people looked out for each other. At least that's what Lucy had always believed. Everything changed on a cold Tuesday morning in October. Lucy was preparing lessons for her students when Sheriff Martinez knocked on the schoolhouse door. His face was grim, and he couldn't meet her eyes when he spoke. "Lucy, I need you to come with me," he said quietly. "There's been a problem at the bank." Lucy's heart started racing. Her first thought was that someone had robbed the bank. Maybe her father was hurt. She grabbed her coat and followed the sheriff through town, noticing how people stopped their conversations to stare at them. Something was very wrong. At the bank, Lucy found chaos. Town officials were going through papers and files. The bank examiner from the state capitol had arrived unexpectedly the day before. What he found made Lucy's world collapse. Her father had been stealing money from the bank for over 3 years. Not large amounts at first, just enough to cover some gambling debts from his weekly poker games. But gambling has a way of growing like a weed. Soon he was taking more and more money, always thinking he could win it back and replace it before anyone noticed. The bank examiner explained it all to Lucy in simple terms. Her father had taken nearly $50,000 from customer accounts. That might not sound like much in a big city, but in Cedar Valley it was everything. It was the Wilson family's savings for their daughter's wedding. It was the money the Martinez family had put aside to expand their ranch. It was the fund the town had been building to fix the old bridge that everyone needed. Worst of all, her father was gone. He had disappeared in the middle of the night, leaving behind only a letter of confession and apology. The letter was addressed to Lucy, but it explained nothing and helped no one. He wrote about shame and mistakes, but offered no way to fix what he had broken. The news spread through Cedar Valley like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that William Chen was a thief and that Lucy was alone to face the consequences. The bank was closed immediately, which meant people couldn't access any of their remaining money. Fear and anger filled the air like smoke from a dangerous fire. Lucy stood in the empty bank, reading her father's letter over and over, hoping she had misunderstood something. But the words remained the same. He had betrayed everyone who trusted him, and now she was left to deal with the aftermath. The first sign of what was coming happened when Lucy tried to buy groceries that afternoon. Mrs. Patterson, who had run the general store for 30 years, looked at her with cold eyes. "I'm sorry, but I can't serve you today," Mrs. Patterson said loudly enough for other customers to hear. "Maybe you should ask your father for money if you can find him." The other people in the store turned to stare. Some looked angry, others looked hurt, but none looked sympathetic. These were people who had lost their savings because of her father's actions. In their minds, Lucy was guilty by association. Walking home became a nightmare. People who had always greeted her warmly now crossed the street to avoid her. Children who had been her students looked confused when their parents pulled them away from her. The respect and love she had worked so hard to earn seemed to vanish overnight. The school board met that evening and voted to terminate her position immediately. They didn't even give her a chance to defend herself or explain that she had known nothing about her father's crimes. The decision was final and swift. "We can't have someone from a dishonest family teaching our children," said Mr. Thompson, who had always praised her work before. "What kind of example would that set?" Lucy tried to explain that she had nothing to do with her father's actions, but no one wanted to listen. In their pain and anger, they needed someone to blame, and she was the only target available. The landlord of her small house visited the next morning. He was nervous and apologetic, but firm in his decision. "I'm sorry, Lucy, but I can't rent to you anymore. People are threatening to boycott my other properties if I keep you as a tenant. You have 1 week to find somewhere else to live. 1 week. After teaching in this town for 5 years, after helping countless families, after being part of this community's heart and soul, she had 1 week to disappear." That night, Lucy sat in her small house surrounded by the life she had built. Her teaching certificates hung on the wall, reminders of the dreams she had worked so hard to achieve. Photos of her students over the years smiled at her from the mantelpiece. Books she had collected for her classroom library sat in neat piles, waiting for lessons that would never come. She had done nothing wrong, but that didn't matter anymore. In the eyes of Cedar Valley, she was the daughter of a thief. She was a reminder of their pain and loss. They wanted her gone, and they were going to make sure she left. As Lucy packed her few belongings, she wondered how everything had changed so quickly. Just a week ago, she had been planning the Christmas pageant with her students. She had been looking forward to the harvest dance where she usually helped serve refreshments. She had been part of something bigger than herself. Now she was alone, with nowhere to go and no one to turn to. The town that had once embraced her had turned its back completely. The people who had once called her friend now saw her as an enemy. Lucy Chen, the beloved schoolteacher of Cedar Valley, no longer existed. In her place stood a young woman with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart, facing an uncertain future in a world that had suddenly become very cold and unwelcoming. The week passed faster than Lucy had hoped. She spent her days looking for anywhere that would take her in, but every door in Cedar Valley remained firmly closed. The boarding house refused her. The hotel owner said he had no rooms available, though she could see empty ones from the street. Even her former friend Rebecca, who had once shared secrets and dreams with her, wouldn't answer her door. With nowhere else to go, Lucy found herself in the old abandoned cabin on the edge of town. It had belonged to a prospector who died years ago, and nobody had bothered to tear it down. The roof leaked, the windows were broken, and mice had made themselves at home in the corners. But it was shelter, and shelter was more than she had anywhere else. The cabin sat about 2 miles from town, hidden behind a grove of oak trees. Lucy could see the smoke from Cedar Valley's chimneys in the distance, but she might as well have been looking at another country. She was so close to the life she had lost, yet completely cut off from it. Winter was coming early that year. Lucy could feel it in the sharp morning air and see it in the way the leaves were changing faster than usual. The cabin had an old wood stove, but she had no money for firewood. She spent her days gathering fallen branches and twigs, trying to build a supply that might last through the cold months ahead. Food became her biggest worry. Lucy had always been a practical woman, but she had never learned to hunt or fish. She tried setting traps for rabbits like she had seen the local boys do, but she never caught anything. Her attempts at fishing in the nearby creek were equally unsuccessful. She began taking desperate risks to survive. Late at night, when the town was asleep, Lucy would sneak back to search for work or food. She discovered that Mrs. Patterson sometimes left spoiled vegetables behind the general store. Lucy would sort through them, finding pieces that were still good enough to eat. The first time she had to eat from the garbage, Lucy cried until her throat was raw. She had gone from being one of the most respected people in town to digging through scraps like a stray dog. But hunger has a way of making pride seem less important. Sometimes she found other opportunities. Mrs. Kelly, an elderly widow who lived on the outskirts of town, had a pile of laundry that seemed too much for her to handle alone. Lucy started washing clothes in the creek and leaving them clean and folded on Mrs. Kelly's porch, with a note asking for whatever payment she could spare. Mrs. Kelly left small amounts of money or food, but never showed herself. Lucy suspected the old woman knew who was helping her, but didn't dare be seen associating with the daughter of a thief. Even kindness had to be hidden in Cedar Valley now. The worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the loneliness that felt like a physical weight on her chest. Lucy had always been surrounded by people who cared about her. She had students who ran to hug her legs every morning. She had colleagues who shared coffee and complaints about difficult parents. She had been part of a community, Now her only companions were the mice in the cabin walls and the crows that gathered outside her window. She talked to them sometimes just to hear a voice, even if it was her own. The silence of her isolation was harder to bear than any physical discomfort. On particularly bad days, Lucy would walk to the edge of town and watch life continue without her. She saw her former students playing in the schoolyard with their new teacher, a stern woman from the next county who had no patience for the creative lessons Lucy used to love creating. She watched families shopping on Main Street, laughing and talking as if nothing had changed. But things had changed for them too. The bank's closure meant people had to travel to the next town for financial services. Some families had lost their life savings and were struggling more than they let on. Lucy could see the strain in their faces, the worry in their movements. Her father's actions had hurt everyone, and her presence would only remind them of their losses. One evening, Lucy overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. Two men were talking outside the saloon about the Chen problem. "She's still around here somewhere," one of them said. "Peterson saw smoke coming from the old prospector's cabin. If she's living there, we need to do something about it." "What do you suggest?" the other man asked. "Same thing we'd do with any other pest. Make it clear she's not welcome until she gets the message and leaves." Lucy realized they were talking about forcing her out of even this miserable shelter. The people of Cedar Valley wouldn't be satisfied until she was completely gone from their sight. The next morning, Lucy found her small vegetable garden destroyed. She had been growing a few potatoes and turnips behind the cabin, hoping they might help her survive the winter. Someone had trampled everything and scattered the plants across the clearing. A note was stuck to a stick in the middle of the destruction. "Leave now or we'll make you leave." That same week, Lucy discovered that her water source had been poisoned. Someone had thrown dead fish into the creek upstream from where she collected water. She would have to walk much further now to find clean water, adding hours to her already difficult daily routine of survival. The message was clear. Even in her exile, even living in poverty and isolation, she was still too close for the people of Cedar Valley. They wanted her gone completely, and they were willing to make her life as miserable as possible until she gave up and left. Lucy sat in her leaking cabin that night, listening to the wind rattle the broken windows. She was down to her last few dollars and her last can of beans. Winter was coming fast, and she had no warm clothes, no reliable food source, and now no nearby water. Her health was starting to fail too. The stress and poor nutrition were taking their toll. She had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and she caught cold easily in the damp cabin. Some mornings she felt dizzy when she stood up, and she knew that was a bad sign. For the first time since this nightmare began, Lucy started thinking about giving up entirely. Maybe it would be easier to just walk into the wilderness and let nature take its course. At least then her suffering would end, and the people of Cedar Valley could forget she had ever existed. But something inside her refused to quit. Maybe it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the memory of all the students she had taught never to give up when things got hard. She had always told them that tough times don't last, but tough people do. Lucy didn't feel very tough anymore, but she was still breathing. As long as she was alive, there was still a chance that tomorrow might be better than today. She just had to find a way to survive long enough to see it. The problem was that she was running out of time. Winter waited for no one, and Cedar Valley had made it clear that she had no friends left in this place. If she was going to survive, she needed a miracle. She just didn't know that her miracle might come in the form of a stranger who saw the world very differently than the people who had turned their backs on her. The stranger rode into Cedar Valley on a Thursday morning, when the autumn air was crisp and the leaves crunched under his horse's hooves. His name was Daniel Morrison, and he had traveled north from Texas looking to buy cattle for his ranch. He was a man in his early 30s, with weathered hands that spoke of years of hard work and eyes that seemed to see more than most people bothered to look for. Daniel had been in town for less than an hour when he witnessed something that stopped him in his tracks. He was tying his horse outside the general store when he saw a young woman approach the front steps. She was thin, too thin, and her clothes hung loose on her frame like they belonged to someone else. But it wasn't her appearance that caught his attention. It was the way she carried herself. Despite her obvious poverty, she walked with her head up and her shoulders straight. There was dignity in her movements, a quiet strength that reminded him of his own mother during the hardest times on their farm. This woman had been knocked down by life, but she hadn't been broken. Lucy had come to town that morning to try one more time to buy basic supplies. She had found $2 in the pocket of an old coat, enough perhaps for some flour and beans that might last her another week. But as she approached the general store, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the doorway. "I told you before, you're not welcome here," Mrs. Patterson said loudly enough for everyone on the street to hear. "We don't serve thieves or their families." "Please," Lucy said quietly. "I just need some flour. I have money to pay." "Money stolen from good people, no doubt," Mrs. Patterson replied. "Take your blood money somewhere else." Other people had stopped to watch the confrontation. Some looked uncomfortable, but none spoke up for Lucy. A few nodded in agreement with Mrs. Patterson. The message was clear. Lucy Chen was not welcome anywhere in Cedar Valley. Daniel watched as Lucy turned away from the store, her shoulders still straight but her hands trembling slightly. He saw her pause at the corner, looking lost and uncertain. Then she began walking toward the edge of town, moving like someone who had nowhere to go but couldn't bear to stay where she wasn't wanted. Something about the scene bothered Daniel deeply. He had seen plenty of hardship in his life, but there was something different about this woman. She didn't look like someone who belonged in poverty. Her speech was educated, her mannerisms refined despite her circumstances. This wasn't someone who had chosen a difficult life or brought trouble on herself. That evening, Daniel sat in the saloon listening to the local men talk. It didn't take long for the conversation to turn to Lucy and her father's crimes. The men spoke with the anger of people who had been personally wronged, and Daniel could understand their pain. Losing your life savings to someone you trusted would make anyone bitter. "That Chen girl is still hanging around like a bad smell," said Tom Wilson, whose daughter's wedding fund had been stolen. "We've made it clear she's not wanted, but she won't take the hint." "Maybe she's waiting for her daddy to come back with the money," laughed Pete Martinez. "Could be waiting a long time for that. She's probably just as crooked as he was," added Bob Thompson. "Apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I bet she knew what he was doing all along." Daniel listened to their accusations and assumptions, but something didn't sit right with him. He had seen the woman outside the store, and she didn't look like someone who was hiding stolen money. She looked like someone who was barely surviving. "Did anyone actually prove she was involved?" Daniel asked quietly. The men turned to look at him, surprised by the question from an outsider. "Well, no," Tom admitted, "but she's his daughter. She had to know something. And even if she didn't know," Pete added, "she's still his blood. She represents everything we lost. Having her around just reminds us of what that family did to this town." Daniel nodded but said nothing more. He had grown up in a place where people believed in individual responsibility. His father had always taught him that you judge a person by their own actions, not by the mistakes of their relatives. But he could see that Cedar Valley had already made up its mind about Lucy Chen. The more Daniel learned about the situation, the more troubled he became. The townspeople spoke of Lucy as if she were a criminal herself, but nobody could point to anything she had actually done wrong. She had been a respected teacher, loved by her students and their parents until her father's crimes came to light. What kind of teacher was she? Daniel asked Mr. Thompson, who had children in the school. "One of the best we ever had," Thompson admitted reluctantly. "My boy Tommy learned more in her class than he had in the previous 3 years combined. She had a way of making lessons interesting, making the children want to learn. So she was good at her job? Very good. But that doesn't matter now. We can't have someone from a dishonest family teaching our children. What kind of example would that set?" Daniel found the logic troubling. If Lucy had been an excellent teacher, and if nobody could prove she had done anything wrong, then why was she being punished for her father's actions? It seemed fundamentally unfair to him. The next morning, Daniel decided to see the situation for himself. He followed the path out of town that he had seen Lucy take the day before. After about 2 miles, he found the old prospector's cabin hidden in the oak grove. Smoke was rising from the chimney, and he could see that someone was trying to make the rundown place livable. The cabin was in terrible condition. Boards were missing from the walls, the roof sagged dangerously, and weeds grew up through gaps in the porch. It was barely fit for animals, let alone a human being, yet someone was clearly trying to survive there. Daniel approached carefully, not wanting to frighten whoever was inside. He knocked on the door and waited. After a moment, Lucy opened it, and he could see the fear in her eyes when she saw a stranger standing on her doorstep. "I'm sorry to bother you," Daniel said, removing his hat. "My name is Daniel Morrison. I saw what happened in town yesterday and I wanted to make sure you were all right. Lucy stared at him suspiciously. In her experience, strangers who showed up at her door usually brought trouble. But there was something different about this man. His voice was gentle, and his eyes held genuine concern instead of judgment. "I'm fine," she said carefully. "Was there something you needed?" Daniel looked around at the cabin, taking in the broken windows patched with cloth, the roof that clearly leaked, and the small pile of firewood that wouldn't last a week. He could see she was anything but fine. "I was wondering if you might be interested in some work," he said. "I'm here buying cattle, and I could use someone to help me keep records and handle correspondence. It would pay well enough for you to get some proper supplies." Lucy's first instinct was distrust. Why would a stranger offer her work when everyone she had known for years wouldn't even sell her food? But desperation was stronger than suspicion. "What kind of work exactly?" she asked. "Writing letters to ranchers, keeping track of which cattle I've seen and which ones might be for sale, that sort of thing. I noticed you speak well, so I assumed you might be educated." "I was a teacher," Lucy said, then immediately regretted revealing so much. "I thought so." Daniel smiled. "Teachers have a certain way about them. My mother was a teacher before she married my father." For the next hour, Daniel explained what he needed. It was honest work that would use her skills, and he offered to pay more than seemed necessary for such simple tasks. Lucy found herself agreeing, though part of her wondered what his real motives might be. Over the following days, Daniel proved to be exactly what he seemed, a decent man who treated her with respect. He never asked about her father or the scandal that had destroyed her life. He simply gave her work to do and paid her fairly for it. More importantly, he treated her like a human being. When she brought him letters she had written, he thanked her politely. When she made suggestions about which ranchers might have the best cattle, he listened to her opinions. It had been so long since anyone had valued her thoughts that Lucy had almost forgotten what it felt like to be heard. Daniel also began bringing her food, claiming he had bought too much for himself. A loaf of fresh bread here, some cheese there, always presented as if he was doing her a favor by letting her help him finish his supplies. Lucy suspected he was being charitable, but she was too hungry to refuse. The work gave Lucy something she hadn't had in months: purpose. She threw herself into the tasks Daniel gave her, writing detailed letters to ranchers throughout the region, and maintaining careful records of livestock prices and availability. For the first time since her world collapsed, she felt useful again. One evening, as they worked together organizing his notes, Daniel asked her about her teaching. Not about why she had lost her job, but about what subjects she had enjoyed teaching and what methods she had found most effective. Lucy found herself talking more than she had in months, sharing stories about her students and the satisfaction she had found in helping children learn. "You miss it," Daniel observed. "Every day," Lucy admitted. "Teaching wasn't just my job. It was who I was." "Maybe it still is who you are," Daniel said. "Just because other people can't see it doesn't mean it's not true." His words stayed with Lucy long after he had returned to his hotel room in town. For months she had been defined by her father's crimes and the town's rejection. Daniel's last day in Cedar Valley arrived sooner than Lucy had expected. She had grown accustomed to their daily work sessions and the sense of purpose they gave her. For 2 weeks she had felt useful again, valued for her mind and skills rather than judged for her family's mistakes. The thought of returning to complete isolation filled her with dread. That morning, Daniel arrived at the cabin earlier than usual. He carried a basket that smelled like fresh biscuits and coffee, luxuries that Lucy hadn't enjoyed in months. But his expression was serious, and Lucy sensed that he had something important to say. "I've been thinking about your situation here," Daniel began as they sat at her small, wobbly table, "and I don't think it's going to get better." Lucy nodded sadly. She had reached the same conclusion herself. "Winter's coming, and I don't think I'll survive it in this place. But I don't have anywhere else to go." The truth of her words hung heavy in the air between them. Daniel had seen how the townspeople treated her, heard their conversations in the saloon, and witnessed their determination to drive her away completely. Cedar Valley had made its decision about Lucy Chen, and nothing she could do would change their minds. "Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about," Daniel said. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I have a proposition for you, but I want you to hear me out completely before you say anything." Lucy waited, her heart beating faster. She couldn't imagine what he might suggest, but his tone made it sound serious and life-changing. "I need a wife," Daniel said simply. "Not for romance or love, but for practical reasons. My ranch is struggling and I can't manage it alone anymore. My mother is getting older and needs care that I can't provide while I'm working the land. The neighboring ranchers don't take me seriously because I don't have a family to anchor me to the community." Lucy stared at him, certain she had misunderstood. Marriage seemed like something from another world, something that happened to other people who hadn't lost everything. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I'm asking you to consider a business arrangement that would benefit both of us," Daniel clarified. "You need a fresh start somewhere people don't know your story. I need a partner who can help run a household, care for my mother, and maybe teach the local children who don't have access to proper schooling." Lucy's mind raced with 1,000 questions and concerns. Marriage to a virtual stranger seemed impossible, even as a business arrangement. But the alternative was staying in Cedar Valley, where she would likely freeze or starve before spring arrived. "Why me?" she asked. "You could find a wife in Texas, someone without complications or a ruined reputation." Daniel leaned back in his chair, considering his answer carefully. He had been thinking about this question himself for days. "I've watched you these past 2 weeks. You're educated, hardworking, and kind. You've faced terrible circumstances without losing your dignity or becoming bitter. Most importantly, you understand what it means to lose everything and start over." He paused, looking out the broken window toward the town that had rejected her so completely. "I also know what it's like to be judged unfairly. My father was a drunk who lost our family farm when I was young. People said I'd turn out just like him, that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I had to prove them wrong every single day for years before they'd give me a chance." Lucy felt a flutter of hope mixed with terror. Here was someone who understood rejection and the struggle to rebuild from nothing. "What exactly would you expect from me in this arrangement?" "Help with the ranch work when needed, care for my mother, manage the household, and if you're willing, teach the children in our area who have no access to proper schooling. In return, you'd have a home, food, safety, and a chance to rebuild your life. We'd be partners in building something successful, not romantic husband and wife." Daniel pulled out a small leather pouch and placed it on the table. The coins inside clinked softly, representing more money than Lucy had seen in months. "I've saved enough to buy your train ticket and some proper clothes for the journey. You'd arrive in Texas as my wife, and nobody there would know anything about your past except what you choose to tell them." Lucy stared at the pouch, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Freedom from Cedar Valley, from the constant judgment and rejection, a chance to teach again, to be useful, to have a purpose beyond mere survival. It seemed too good to be true, which made her deeply suspicious. But the idea of marriage, even a practical one, frightened her more than she wanted to admit. "What if it doesn't work? What if your mother doesn't like me or the community doesn't accept me? What if you decide I'm not worth the trouble after all? Then we'll deal with those problems when they come," Daniel said calmly. "But staying here isn't working either. At least in Texas, you'd have a fighting chance to build something new." Lucy asked the question that had been haunting her since he started speaking. "Why would you take such a risk on someone like me? Everyone here thinks I'm tainted by my father's crimes. What if they're right? What if I really am just as dishonest as he was?" Daniel looked directly into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Because I believe people should be judged by their own actions, not their family's mistakes. Because I've seen how you've handled yourself under pressure, and I respect that more than you know. And because sometimes the best partnerships come from mutual need rather than romantic feelings." He stood up, pacing the small cabin as he continued. "I won't lie to you, Lucy. Life on a Texas ranch is hard work. The weather can be brutal, the isolation can be difficult, and success is never guaranteed. But it's honest work with honest people who care more about what you contribute than where you came from." Lucy tried to imagine this new life he was describing, teaching children again, caring for an elderly woman who might become like a mother to her, working alongside Daniel to build something meaningful from the ground up. It seemed like a dream she had given up hope of ever achieving. "What's the catch?" she asked. "There has to be something you're not telling me. Men don't just offer marriage to desperate women out of pure kindness." Daniel smiled for the first time that morning, and Lucy realized how much she had come to appreciate his rare moments of humor. "The catch is that you'd be stuck with me and my cantankerous mother in the middle of nowhere, Texas, trying to make a success out of 500 acres of stubborn land. Some people would consider that punishment enough. Despite everything, Lucy found herself smiling back. Daniel had been nothing but kind and respectful during their time together. He had treated her with more consideration in 2 weeks than her former neighbors had shown in years. If she had to enter a marriage of convenience with anyone, he seemed like the best possible choice. "How long would I have to decide?" she asked, though part of her already knew what her answer would be. "I'm leaving tomorrow morning," Daniel said. "I know it's not much time, but winter is coming here fast, and I need to get back to my ranch before the weather turns bad. The cattle need tending and my mother needs me." Lucy felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her like a physical force. She could stay in Cedar Valley and almost certainly die of cold or hunger before spring. She could try to make it to another town with no money and no prospects, probably ending up in the same desperate situation. Or she could trust this stranger who had shown her more kindness in 2 weeks than her former community had shown in months. "Can I ask you something personal?" Lucy said. "Do you believe I had anything to do with my father's crimes?" Daniel's answer came without hesitation. "No, I don't. I think you're an innocent person who got caught up in someone else's mess. I think you've been punished for crimes you didn't commit by people who needed someone to blame for their pain." His words broke something loose in Lucy's chest, a knot of shame and self-doubt that had been growing tighter every day since her father's disappearance. Someone believed in her innocence. Someone thought she was worth saving, worth taking a chance on. "If I say yes," she said slowly, "what happens next?" "We go to the Justice of the Peace tomorrow morning before I leave. Simple ceremony, just the legal paperwork to make it official. Then you pack whatever you want to bring, and we head south to Texas and your new life." Daniel reached across the table and gently took her hand. "Lucy, I want you to know that whatever you decide, these past 2 weeks have shown me something important. Cedar Valley doesn't deserve someone like you. You're worth more than the way they've treated you, and you deserve a chance to prove that to yourself and the world." Lucy looked around the cabin that had been her prison for months, at the broken windows that let in cold drafts, the leaking roof that dripped when it rained, the constant reminder of how far she had fallen. Then she looked at Daniel, who was offering her something she had thought was impossible: hope for a future. "I need the night to think about it," she said, though her heart was already pulling her toward the answer. Daniel nodded understandingly. "I know it's a big decision. Take all the time you need. But Lucy, whatever you decide, I want you to remember something. You're not your father. You're not defined by his mistakes or their judgment. You're a good person who deserves a chance at happiness." Lucy woke before dawn on the morning that would change her life forever. She had barely slept, her mind spinning between excitement and terror about the decision she had made. When Daniel knocked on her door at sunrise, she was ready with her answer, and her few belongings packed in a worn canvas bag. "Yes," she said simply when she opened the door. "I'll marry you." Daniel smiled, and she could see genuine relief wash over his face. "I'm glad. I think we can make this work, Lucy, I really do." As they walked toward town together, Lucy felt like she was in a dream. Just yesterday, she had been a woman with no future, no hope, and no options. Now she was about to become a wife and start a completely new life hundreds of miles away. The transformation seemed too dramatic to be real. The ceremony at the Justice of the Peace was nothing like the wedding Lucy had once dreamed of as a young girl. She had imagined a white dress, flowers in her hair, and a church full of friends and family celebrating her happiness. Instead, there were no flowers, no white dress, no family or friends to witness the moment. Just Lucy in her best but worn dress, Daniel in his clean but simple clothes, and the bored-looking official who performed dozens of these ceremonies every month. The whole thing took less than 10 minutes. They exchanged simple vows written by the state, promising to honor and support each other according to the law. They signed papers that made their arrangement legal, and shook hands like business partners sealing a deal, which Lucy supposed was exactly what they were doing. "You may kiss the bride," the Justice of the Peace said automatically. Lucy and Daniel looked at each other awkwardly for a moment. Then Daniel leaned forward and gave her a gentle, brief kiss on the cheek. It was hardly romantic, but it was kind and respectful, which seemed to sum up everything about their unusual arrangement. As they left the building, Lucy caught sight of several townspeople watching from across the street. Some looked surprised to see her getting married. Others appeared relieved that the Chen problem was finally leaving town permanently. None looked sorry to see her go, and Lucy realized she felt nothing but relief about that fact. Mrs. Patterson stood in front of her general store, arms crossed and lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. Lucy met her eyes for a moment, then lifted her chin and walked past without saying a word. She was done trying to explain herself to people who had already decided she was guilty of crimes she had never committed. The train station was a flurry of activity as passengers prepared for the journey south. Daniel had purchased tickets for a sleeper car, which surprised Lucy. She had expected they would sit up in the regular passenger section for the long trip to Texas. "You're my wife now," Daniel explained when she questioned the expense. "People will expect us to travel properly, and I want to start this arrangement as we mean to continue, with respect and consideration for each other." The sleeper car had 2 narrow beds and a small sitting area. It was cramped but private, which Lucy appreciated greatly. She wasn't ready to answer questions from curious strangers about her new husband and their whirlwind romance. The story they had agreed to tell was that they had been corresponding for months before meeting, which wasn't entirely untrue given their work together in Cedar Valley. As the train pulled away from Cedar Valley with a great belch of steam and smoke, Lucy pressed her face to the window and watched the only home she had ever known disappear into the distance. She felt a mixture of sadness and relief that surprised her with its intensity. This place had given her the happiest years of her life when she was teaching, but it had also become the source of her deepest pain and humiliation. "Any regrets?" Daniel asked, settling into the seat across from her. "Not yet," Lucy said honestly. "Ask me again in a few months when we see how this experiment turns out." The journey to Texas would take 3 days, with stops in several cities along the way. For the first few hours, Lucy and Daniel sat in awkward silence, both wondering what they were supposed to talk about now that they were legally married strangers. The weight of what they had just done settled over them like a heavy blanket. Daniel finally broke the ice by asking about her teaching methods and philosophy. He seemed genuinely interested in education, explaining that his own schooling had been limited due to his family's financial struggles, and he wanted to make sure the children in their area had better opportunities than he had received. "Tell me about the ranch," Lucy said, realizing she knew very little about the place that would become her new home. "What will my daily life be like there?" Daniel's face lit up as he described the land he was working to build into something successful. The Morrison Ranch sat on 500 acres of rolling hills about 20 miles outside of a town called Millfield. The landscape was different from anything Lucy had known, with wide open spaces and endless sky that made a person feel both small and free at the same time. He raised cattle mostly, with some horses and a few crops for their own use. The work was hard and never-ending, especially during calving season and roundups, but there was something deeply satisfying about working the land and building something with your own hands. "It's not much yet," he admitted. "The house is small, just 3 rooms, but it's solid and weatherproof. My mother has the bedroom and I've been sleeping in the front room. We'll need to figure out new arrangements now that you're coming." Lucy blushed, realizing she hadn't thought about the practical details of sharing a home with a man she barely knew. The physical aspects of marriage, even a marriage of convenience, suddenly seemed very real and complicated. "We can work something out," she said quickly, hoping her embarrassment didn't show too obviously. "The previous owner built a small addition that was meant to be a study," Daniel continued, seeming to understand her discomfort. "We could set up a bed in there for you, if that would be more comfortable. It would give you privacy and a space of your own." Lucy nodded gratefully. Daniel seemed to understand that despite their legal marriage, they were essentially strangers who needed time to get to know each other before any kind of intimacy could be considered. As the train traveled south through changing landscapes, Daniel told her about his mother, Elena Morrison. She was in her 60s and had been a teacher herself before marrying Daniel's father. She had been dealing with increasing weakness and episodes of confusion lately, which worried Daniel greatly. "She's still sharp most of the time," he explained, "but some days she gets confused about where she is or what year it is. She might think you're someone from her past or forget that we're married. The doctor says it might get worse as she ages. That's part of why I need help caring for her." Lucy felt a flutter of nervousness about meeting Elena. What if the older woman resented having a stranger suddenly thrust into their home? What if she could tell that Lucy and Daniel's marriage wasn't based on love? What if she was difficult to care for or became suspicious about their arrangement? "What have you told her about me?" Lucy asked. "The truth mostly," Daniel said. "That I met a wonderful teacher who needed a fresh start, and that we decided we could help each other build something good." She's looking forward to having another woman around the house. She gets lonely with just me for company. That evening, as they ate dinner in the train's dining car, Lucy began to relax slightly. Daniel was easy to talk to once she got past her initial nervousness. He asked thoughtful questions about her teaching experiences and shared stories about life on the ranch that made her laugh despite her anxieties. The dining car was elegant, with white tablecloths and proper silverware that reminded Lucy of better times in her life. Other passengers glanced at them occasionally, probably wondering about the obvious newlyweds who seemed more like polite acquaintances than passionate lovers. "You know," Lucy said as they finished their meal, "I was terrified this morning that I was making a terrible mistake. But you're not at all what I expected when I imagined marrying a stranger." "What did you expect?" Daniel asked, looking amused. "Someone stern and demanding, I suppose. Someone who would treat me like hired help instead of a partner. Someone who might take advantage of my desperate situation." Daniel grew serious, setting down his coffee cup and looking directly into her eyes. "Lucy, I want to be clear about something. This arrangement only works if we treat each other with respect and consideration. You're not my servant or my property. You're my partner in making this ranch succeed and building a life together." On the second day of travel, they began discussing practical matters in more detail. What would Lucy's role be beyond caring for Elena? How would they explain their quick marriage to the neighbors? What if the arrangement didn't work out for one of them? What were the boundaries of their relationship? Daniel had clearly thought through these issues carefully. He suggested they tell people they had corresponded for months before meeting, which wasn't entirely untrue given their work together in Cedar Valley. As for Lucy's role, he wanted her to have as much authority in running the household as she was comfortable taking. "What if I want to start a school?" Lucy asked, surprising herself with the question. She hadn't realized she was even considering it until the words came out of her mouth. The Morrison Ranch appeared before Lucy like something from a dream she hadn't dared to have. Rolling green hills stretched as far as she could see, dotted with cattle and horses that moved lazily in the afternoon sun. The house was small but sturdy, built from local stone with a wide porch that promised cool evenings and morning coffee in the fresh air. Lucy had never seen so much open space in her life. Coming from a small town where buildings crowded together along narrow streets, the vastness of Texas took her breath away. The sky seemed enormous, painted in shades of blue she had never noticed before, with clouds that cast moving shadows across the grassland. Elena Morrison was waiting on that porch when the wagon pulled up, and Lucy's first impression was of a woman who had once been formidable, but was now fighting against the weakness of age. She was tall and thin, with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Despite her obvious frailty, she carried herself with the dignity of someone who had never backed down from a challenge. "So you're the young woman who's going to help my stubborn son finally make something of this place," Elena said as Lucy approached the porch. Her voice was warm but assessing, like a teacher meeting a new student on the first day of school. "I hope so, Mrs. Morrison," Lucy replied, suddenly nervous about making a good impression on this woman who would essentially become her mother-in-law. "Call me Elena, dear. We're family now." The older woman's smile was genuine, and Lucy felt some of her tension ease. "Daniel tells me you were a teacher. Lord knows we need more education out here. Too many children growing up without proper learning because there's nowhere for them to go to school." That first evening, as Elena showed Lucy around the house, Lucy began to understand the full scope of what she had taken on. The house was clean but clearly managed by people who had little time for domestic niceties. Meals were simple and functional, designed to fuel hard-working bodies rather than please refined tastes. Mending was piled in a basket that hadn't been touched in weeks. The garden behind the house had potential, but needed someone with time and knowledge to tend it properly. The kitchen was basic but well-equipped, with a large stove for cooking and canning, and shelves lined with preserving jars from previous harvests. Lucy could see that with some organization and regular attention, this could become the heart of a truly comfortable home. Elena's condition was more concerning than Daniel had fully explained during their journey. During their tour of the house, the older woman forgot twice what she was showing Lucy and had to be gently reminded. She also seemed confused about whether Lucy was Daniel's wife, a hired helper or perhaps a visiting relative, asking the same questions multiple times within the span of an hour. "Don't worry about her memory," Daniel said quietly that night as they arranged Lucy's sleeping area in the small addition he had mentioned. She has good days and bad days. On her good days, she's still the smartest person I know. On the bad days, just be patient with her. Lucy's room was tiny but private, with a single window that looked out over the hills toward the setting sun. Daniel had hung a curtain across the doorway to give her some privacy, and he had built a simple but sturdy bed frame with his own hands. It wasn't luxurious, but it was clean, safe, and dry, which was more than she had known in months. The first few weeks were an adjustment period that tested everyone's patience and adaptability. Lucy had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, which started before dawn and often didn't end until well after dark. Daniel and the two hired hands worked from sunrise to sunset, caring for livestock, mending fences, checking water sources, and preparing for the challenges that each season would bring. Lucy threw herself into household tasks with the same determination and systematic approach she had once brought to teaching. She reorganized the kitchen to make cooking more efficient, established a schedule for cleaning and mending that kept the house running smoothly, and began planning a proper garden for the spring that would provide fresh vegetables and herbs for the table. Elena watched these changes with growing approval, often commenting that the house had needed a woman's touch for years. "Daniel tries his best," she would say, "but men don't notice when things need organizing or when the little comforts are missing." The older woman became Lucy's first real friend on the ranch. Despite her memory problems, Elena was still capable of long, engaging conversations about books, politics, current events, and her experiences as a young teacher decades earlier. She had taught in a one-room schoolhouse for 5 years before marrying Daniel's father, and she understood completely the satisfaction Lucy had found in education. "Teaching gets in your blood," Elena said one afternoon as they worked together preserving vegetables from the garden. "Once you've seen a child's face light up with understanding, once you've watched knowledge open up new worlds for someone, you never stop wanting to create that moment again and again." Lucy found herself caring for Elena with growing affection and genuine concern. The older woman was sometimes confused but never difficult or demanding. She appreciated help without being helpless, and she treated Lucy like the daughter she had never had, rather than an intruder who had suddenly appeared in her home. More importantly, Elena never questioned the circumstances of Lucy and Daniel's marriage. She seemed to accept their story about corresponding before meeting, and she appeared genuinely happy to have another woman in the house to talk with and share the daily tasks of keeping a home running. Daniel proved to be an ideal partner in their unusual arrangement. He was respectful of Lucy's space and privacy, but he also included her in decisions about the ranch operations. He asked her opinion on everything from which crops to plant to how to improve the efficiency of their daily routines. He treated her like an equal partner rather than a subordinate. More importantly, he defended her place in their home and community from the very beginning. When Mrs. Kelly from the neighboring ranch made a comment about the speed of their courtship during Lucy's first visit to town, Daniel firmly but politely made it clear that his wife was exactly where she belonged, and that their personal business was not open for discussion. "People will always have opinions about things they don't understand," he told Lucy later. "But what matters is that we know the truth about our arrangement and we're both satisfied with how things are working out." As autumn turned toward winter, Lucy began to establish herself in the wider community around Millfield. The other ranch wives were initially curious about the newcomer who had married Daniel Morrison so quickly and quietly. But Lucy's practical skills, willingness to help others, and obvious intelligence soon won them over completely. When the Hendersons' youngest child came down with a dangerous fever that wouldn't break, Lucy sat with the family for 3 days and nights. Using knowledge she had learned from her mother about treating childhood illnesses, she prepared cooling baths, administered herbal teas, and provided the calm, steady presence that frightened parents desperately needed. When the fever finally broke on the 4th day, Mrs. Henderson declared that Lucy Morrison was exactly the kind of neighbor everyone hoped for. She didn't just help, Mrs. Henderson told everyone who would listen. She took charge when we were too scared to think straight, and she saved our boy's life. Lucy also began to make connections with the children in the area, which filled a void in her heart that she hadn't realized was still aching. There was no school within reasonable traveling distance, and most children received only basic education from their parents when time permitted. Lucy started informally, helping the Johnson children with reading when she visited their mother to share recipes and household tips. Word spread quickly through the community that the Morrison Ranch had a real teacher, someone with formal training and genuine skill who was willing to help local children learn. Soon, Lucy found herself teaching small groups of children whenever she went to town or visited neighbors. The children were hungry for learning in a way that reminded Lucy why she had fallen in love with teaching in the first place. They asked endless questions, absorbed every lesson eagerly, and showed the kind of intellectual curiosity that made education a joy rather than a chore. "You should start a proper school," Elena suggested one evening as Lucy told her about the day's impromptu lesson with the Patterson children. These families would support it if they knew it was available. They want their children to have better opportunities than they had. The idea excited Lucy more than she wanted to admit. She had missed teaching desperately, and the opportunity to create a school from scratch, to build an educational program exactly the way she thought it should be done, was incredibly appealing. But she worried about overstepping her role in Daniel's life and taking on more than she could handle while caring for Elena and managing the household. When she mentioned the possibility to Daniel, his response surprised and delighted her. "I think that's exactly what this community needs," he said immediately. "We could clear out the old barn and fix it up as a proper schoolhouse. It would be good for the ranch to be known as a place that supports education and helps families in the area." Lucy felt a familiar thrill at the prospect of planning curriculum, organizing a classroom. Spring arrived at the Morrison Ranch with a burst of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. Lucy had spent the winter months carefully planning her school, sketching classroom layouts and developing curriculum that would serve children of different ages and abilities. As the weather warmed, Daniel helped her convert the old barn into a proper classroom, and Lucy felt more excited than she had in years. They installed windows to let in natural light, built simple but sturdy desks and benches, and created a space that felt welcoming to children eager to learn. Daniel surprised Lucy by hand-carving a beautiful sign that read Morrison Ranch School in elegant letters. When he hung it above the door, Lucy felt tears spring to her eyes at this tangible proof that her dreams were becoming reality. The school opened in March with 12 students ranging in age from 6 to 14. Lucy had never been happier than she was standing in front of her new classroom, seeing the excitement and curiosity in young faces as they prepared for their first real lessons. The community had rallied around the project with enthusiasm, with families contributing supplies, volunteer labor, and even a small bell that could be rung to call children to class. But spring also brought challenges that would test the strength of the partnership Lucy and Daniel had built over the winter months. Elena's condition had been slowly worsening throughout the cold season, and by April, it was clear that her memory problems were becoming more serious and more frequent. Some days Elena didn't recognize Lucy at all, calling her by the names of people from her distant past. She would ask repeatedly when her husband was coming home, forgetting that he had died years earlier. Sometimes she would try to leave the house to go home, to places that existed only in her fading memories. Lucy found herself spending more time caring for Elena, helping her dress in the mornings, making sure she ate regular meals, and gently redirecting her when confusion set in. It was exhausting work that required endless patience, but Lucy approached it with the same dedication and love she brought to teaching. "I don't know how you do it," Daniel said one evening after a particularly difficult day, when Elena had become agitated and couldn't remember where she was. "She doesn't even remember who you are half the time, but you treat her with such kindness and patience when she's family," Lucy said simply, smoothing Elena's blanket as the older woman finally settled into peaceful sleep. "And on her good days, she's still the woman who welcomed me into this house when nobody else in the world wanted me. She deserves all the care and respect I can give her." Daniel watched Lucy gently adjust Elena's pillows and check that she was comfortable for the night. Something shifted in his chest as he observed the care and compassion Lucy showed to his mother, asking for nothing in return except the satisfaction of doing what was right. Their partnership had evolved gradually over the months since Lucy's arrival. What had started as a practical business arrangement had become a true collaboration, built on mutual respect and shared goals. Lucy managed the household and taught school while Daniel ran the ranch operations, but they consulted each other on every important decision. They had learned each other's habits and preferences, developed inside jokes and shared memories, and created routines that worked perfectly for both of them. More significantly, they had begun to genuinely enjoy each other's company in ways that went far beyond their original agreement. Evening conversations that had once been awkward exchanges of necessary information had become the highlight of both their days. They talked about everything from Lucy's students and their progress to Daniel's plans for expanding the cattle herd, from books they were reading to dreams they had for the future of the ranch. The change in their relationship became apparent to Lucy one evening in May, when Daniel returned from a week-long cattle buying trip. She hadn't realized how much she had missed his presence until she saw him riding up the path to the house, and her heart lifted in a way that had nothing to do with practical partnership and everything to do with genuine affection and longing. "How did everything go while I was gone?" Daniel asked as he sat down to the dinner Lucy had prepared specially for his return. "Elena had more good days than bad. Thank goodness, and the children are doing wonderfully with their reading and arithmetic," Lucy reported. "But I have to admit I missed having someone to talk to in the evenings. The house felt empty without you." Daniel smiled, and Lucy noticed how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he was genuinely pleased. "I missed that too. The hotel in town was comfortable enough, but it wasn't home. Nothing felt right without our evening conversations. Home. The word hung between them with new and deeper meaning. This place had become home to both of them, not just because of the practical benefits their arrangement provided, but because of the emotional connection they had built together day by day. The shift in their relationship became even more obvious when Elena's condition took a dramatic turn for the worse in June. She began having episodes where she didn't recognize either Lucy or Daniel, becoming frightened and sometimes trying to leave the house to search for people who had died years ago. These episodes were heartbreaking to witness and exhausting to manage. During one particularly difficult night, when Elena was agitated and couldn't be comforted by anything they tried, Lucy and Daniel worked together as a team to calm her. They took turns sitting with her, speaking in soothing voices, holding her hands and helping her feel safe in her confusion. Finally, near dawn, Elena fell into a peaceful sleep, and both Lucy and Daniel were exhausted. They found themselves sitting together on the porch as the sun rose, both emotionally drained but relieved that the crisis had passed. Without thinking about it, Lucy leaned against Daniel's shoulder, and he put his arm around her in a gesture of comfort that felt completely natural and right. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I couldn't handle this alone. I don't know what I would have done without you here." "You don't have to handle anything alone anymore," Lucy replied, surprised by how natural it felt to be close to him like this. "We're partners, remember? We face everything together." But as they sat together, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, both of them realized that partnership was no longer an adequate word for what they had become. They were caring for Elena together like a real family would. They were building dreams and making plans together like a real married couple would. The lines between their practical arrangement and genuine emotional connection had blurred beyond recognition. The community around them had already begun to see them as a true married couple rather than business partners. When Mrs. Henderson brought her new baby to meet Lucy, she commented on how happy and settled Lucy looked and how well marriage seemed to suit her. When the men gathered to help Daniel repair storm damage to his barn, they teased him good-naturedly about being a lucky man to have found such a wonderful wife. Lucy began to notice how much she looked forward to Daniel's return each evening, how she saved up stories from her day to share with him, how his opinion had become more important to her than anyone else's. She caught herself watching him work and admiring not just his dedication to the ranch, but the gentle way he spoke to the animals, the respect he showed every person he met, and the quiet strength he displayed in everything he did. Daniel found himself thinking about Lucy throughout his workdays, wondering what she was teaching her students, worrying about whether Elena was having a difficult day, and planning small surprises that might make Lucy smile. He noticed how the house felt empty and lifeless when she was away visiting neighbors, and how her laughter had become one of his favorite sounds in the world. The turning point came in July when Elena passed away peacefully in her sleep after several days of declining health. Lucy found her in the morning, lying peacefully in her bed with a slight smile on her face, and called for Daniel with tears streaming down her cheeks. Daniel held his mother's hand and said goodbye with his own tears falling freely. while Lucy stood beside him, her heart breaking for the woman, who had become like a mother to her as well. Elena's funeral brought the entire community together to honor a woman who had touched many lives during her years as a teacher and ranch wife. Lucy organized the reception with help from neighboring women, coordinated the food donations, and provided support for the mourning process. She moved through the day with quiet grace, accepting condolences and managing details while supporting Daniel through his grief. After the last guest had gone home and the dishes were washed and put away, Lucy and Daniel sat together in the quiet house that suddenly felt too big and too empty without Elena's presence. Her absence left a void that seemed to echo through every room, and both of them struggled with the reality that the anchor of their arrangement was gone. "What happens now?" Lucy asked softly, voicing the question that had been haunting both of them since Elena's death. Daniel took her hand, a gesture that had become natural over the months of caring for his mother together. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. "Our original arrangement was supposed to be about caring for my mother and building the ranch together. Now she's gone and the ranch is more successful than ever." 2 years had passed since Lucy Morrison first arrived at the ranch as a desperate woman, fleeing from disgrace and ruin. Now in the autumn of 1887, she stood in her thriving school watching her students recite poetry with confidence and joy, and she could hardly recognize the broken, hopeless person she had once been. The transformation was so complete that sometimes she had to remind herself that her story had begun with such darkness and despair. The Morrison Ranch had become one of the most successful and respected operations in the county. Daniel's cattle were known throughout Texas for their quality, and buyers came from as far away as San Antonio and Houston to purchase his stock. The ranch had expanded to include additional land, new buildings, and improved facilities that made it a model for other operations in the area. But more than business success, the ranch had become a cornerstone of the community, largely because of the school Lucy had built and the reputation she had earned as someone who could be counted on in any crisis. Her influence extended far beyond education, and she had become an unofficial leader among the women of the area. Lucy's school now served 26 children from families scattered across a 50-mile radius. Some students boarded with local families during the week to attend classes, and Lucy had begun offering evening lessons for adults who wanted to improve their reading, writing, and arithmetic skills. The Texas State Education Department had officially recognized her school as a model rural institution, and Lucy had received both a formal teaching certificate from the state university and an invitation to speak at educational conferences. The school building itself had grown from the converted barn into a proper 2-room schoolhouse with separate areas for younger and older students. Daniel had built additional desks, installed a proper blackboard, and even constructed a small library where students could borrow books to take home. The community took pride in having such an excellent educational facility in their area, but it was during the Great Drought of 1887 that Lucy truly proved her worth to the community in ways that had nothing to do with education. When the rains failed for 3 months straight and several smaller ranches faced complete bankruptcy, Lucy organized a relief effort that saved more than a dozen families from losing everything they had worked for. She coordinated food donations from more successful families, arranged for struggling ranchers to share resources and equipment, and created a work exchange program that allowed men to earn money, helping with harvest and cattle drives on larger operations. Her organizational skills and natural leadership turned what could have been a devastating disaster into an inspiring example of community cooperation and mutual support. Lucy traveled from ranch to ranch, assessing needs, coordinating aid, and providing encouragement to families who were on the verge of giving up. She worked 18-hour days for weeks, barely sleeping as she managed the complex logistics of keeping an entire community fed and hopeful during the crisis. That woman could organize water to flow uphill if she set her mind to it, said Tom Henderson, whose ranch had been saved by Lucy's intervention. Daniel Morrison is the luckiest man in Texas to have found a wife like that. Daniel knew he was incredibly fortunate, but not just because of Lucy's practical abilities and community leadership. Their love had deepened and strengthened over the 2 years since Elena's death, growing into the kind of partnership that made everything else in life seem more meaningful and worthwhile. What had begun as mutual respect and affection had evolved into a love so deep and comfortable that neither of them could imagine life any other way. They had settled into a marriage that perfectly balanced independence with partnership, individual dreams with shared goals. Lucy continued to run her school and take on community projects that challenged and fulfilled her, while Daniel focused on expanding the ranch and establishing their reputation as cattle breeders. But they made all major decisions together, supported each other's ambitions without question, and had learned to be both lovers and best friends. The house had been significantly expanded over the years to include a proper master bedroom for Lucy and Daniel, a larger kitchen with modern conveniences, a comfortable sitting room where Lucy could meet with parents about their children's education, and even a formal dining room for entertaining neighbors and visiting officials. The old addition had been converted into Lucy's private study, where she prepared lessons, graded papers, and worked on the book about rural education that she had begun writing. The walls were lined with books, teaching materials, and correspondence from educators around the country who had heard about her successful school. Their personal happiness was evident to everyone who knew them. They could often be seen working together in the extensive garden Lucy had planted behind the house, or sitting on the expanded porch in the evenings discussing the day's events and making plans for the future. Their relationship had the kind of comfortable intimacy and genuine affection that made their friends smile and their neighbors feel hopeful about the possibility of lasting love. But the true test of how far Lucy had come arrived, unexpectedly on a crisp October morning that started like any other. She was teaching a mathematics lesson to her older students when young Billy Patterson burst into the classroom with news that made her heart stop for a moment before steadying with new strength. "Mrs. Morrison," Billy said breathlessly, "there are some people from Cedar Valley at the general store in Millfield. They're asking questions about you and they say they have important news." Lucy felt the familiar cold fear wash over her for just an instant, but this time it was followed immediately by something much stronger: determination and confidence. She was not the same frightened woman who had fled Cedar Valley in disgrace. She had built a life here, earned respect through her own actions, and created a community that valued her contributions. Whatever these visitors wanted, she would face it with her head held high. "Thank you for telling me, Billy," she said calmly, her voice steady and controlled. "Please continue with your arithmetic problems while I step outside for a moment to think about this news." Lucy walked out into the autumn sunshine and took several deep breaths of the crisp Texas air. Whatever had brought people from her past all the way to Texas, she would face it head-on with the strength and dignity she had learned to cultivate. She was Lucy Morrison now, respected teacher and community leader, not the broken daughter of a disgraced banker. That evening, Daniel found her sitting on their porch step, staring out at the hills that had become so familiar and beloved over the years. He sat down beside her without saying anything, waiting patiently for her to share what was troubling her. After 4 years of marriage, he knew when she needed quiet support more than questions. "People from Cedar Valley are in town," Lucy said finally, her voice thoughtful rather than fearful. "I don't know what they want after all this time, but I can't help wondering if my past is about to catch up with me in some way." Daniel put his arm around her shoulders, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over the years. "Whatever they want, we'll handle it together," he said with quiet confidence. "You're not alone anymore, Lucy. This is your home, these people are your community, and I am your husband who loves you completely. Nobody can take any of that away from you, no matter what news they bring." The next morning, Lucy and Daniel rode into Millfield together to confront whatever message the visitors from Cedar Valley had brought. They found 3 men waiting at the hotel: Sheriff Martinez, Tom Wilson, and Pete Thompson. Lucy recognized them immediately, and her first instinct was a brief moment of wanting to turn around and leave. But Daniel's steady presence beside her and her own hard-won confidence gave her the courage to face whatever they had come to say. "Lucy," Sheriff Martinez said, standing respectfully as she approached. He looked older and more tired than she remembered, with lines of worry and regret etched deep around his eyes. "We've come a long way to talk to you. Thank you for agreeing to see us." "About what?" Daniel asked, stepping slightly forward in a protective gesture that had become instinctive over the years. "About her father," Tom Wilson said, his voice heavy with emotion. "William Chen is dead. He died in a jail cell in San Francisco about 6 months ago. And before he died, he told the authorities where he hid all the money he stole from us." Lucy felt the world shift around her, but this time she remained steady on her feet. Her father was dead, and apparently, The truth was finally coming out after all these years. Sheriff Martinez continued the story with obvious relief at finally being able to tell it. William Chen had been arrested for another theft in California and had fallen seriously ill in jail. Facing death and apparently consumed with guilt, he had confessed to the Cedar Valley crime and provided detailed information about where he had hidden the stolen funds. "We recovered almost $40,000, Martinez explained. "It was buried in the old cemetery behind the church, of all places. We can't return everything people lost because of interest and the time that's passed, but we can give back most of it, and we can clear your name completely and officially." Tom Wilson stepped forward, removing his hat and holding it awkwardly in his hands. His face showed genuine remorse and shame. "Lucy,